The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Judge Advocate General's office at Naval Station San Diego, casting sharp lines across polished floors that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old leather-bound law books. The waiting area hummed with the controlled chaos of military legal proceedings, junior officers shuffling files, paralegals rushing between offices, the distant clack of typewriters mixing with hushed conversations about upcoming court-martials. In the center of it all sat a woman in plain civilian clothes. Dark gray slacks, a simple white blouse, no jewelry except a thin silver watch. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, unremarkable bun. She held a worn leather briefcase on her lap, the kind that had seen years of use but was meticulously maintained. Nothing about her demanded attention. Captain Bradley Morrison spotted her first as he strode through the corridor, medals gleaming on his service dress blues. He was the senior defense counsel, known throughout the fleet for his courtroom theatrics and his ego that matched his win record. His eyes swept over her dismissively. "You must be the new paralegal," he said loudly, not bothering to lower his voice. "Try to keep up. We don't have time to hold hands around here." A few passing sailors exchanged glances. One young petty officer winced slightly, recognizing the tone, the casual cruelty of someone who enjoyed reminding others of their place. The woman looked up calmly, her expression neutral and unreadable. "I'll do my best, Captain," she said simply, her voice quiet but clear. Morrison smirked and continued past, already moving on to someone he deemed more important. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reeves, the assistant trial counsel, watched the exchange from her office doorway. Something about the woman's stillness caught her attention, the way she didn't fidget, didn't look away, didn't seem bothered at all. That kind of composure wasn't common in new personnel, especially civilians entering the intimidating world of military justice. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Elena Vasquez had been many things in her career, but invisible was rarely one of them. Yet today, as she sat in the waiting area of the JAG office, that's exactly what she needed to be. She watched the flow of personnel with practiced observation. The junior officers moved with a mixture of confidence and anxiety, the kind that came from being smart enough to know the law but young enough to doubt themselves under pressure. The enlisted legal clerks carried themselves with quiet efficiency, the backbone of every legal operation she'd ever seen. And then there were the senior attorneys. They moved differently, louder, more certain. Some earned it through years of hard work and genuine expertise. Others, like Captain Morrison, wore their authority like armor, using volume and rank to compensate for gaps in their actual knowledge. Elena had seen his type before. Many times. She shifted slightly in her chair, and the movement revealed a small detail most people would miss: a faded ink stain on the inside of her right middle finger. The kind lawyers got from years of handwriting notes in the margins of legal briefs before everything went digital. The stain had never quite washed away, even decades later. Commander James Park approached next, carrying a stack of case files that threatened to spill from his arms. He was the senior trial counsel, the lead prosecutor for the region, and his reputation preceded him: brilliant legal mind, demanding standards, zero tolerance for incompetence. "Are you the legal consultant from D.C.?" he asked, his tone clipped and professional. "Yes, sir," Elena replied. "Elena Vasquez." Park nodded curtly. "You'll be observing the Henderson court-martial. Captain Morrison is lead defense. It starts in 2 hours. He paused, studying her. "You've worked military cases before." "A few," she said simply. "Then you know how this works. Stay quiet. Take notes. Don't interfere." He didn't say it rudely, just matter-of-factly, the way someone gives instructions to a subordinate they assume needs guidance. "Understood," Elena said. Park walked away, already focused on the next task. Elena watched him go, noting the way he carried himself: competent, dedicated, but clearly stretched thin by the demands of the job. A good lawyer drowning in caseload, trying to maintain standards while the system pushed him faster than thoroughness allowed. Across the room, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb sat at the legal clerk's desk, processing paperwork with the methodical precision of someone who'd been doing this job for 15 years. Unlike the officers rushing past, he actually looked at Elena, really looked. His eyes tracked from her worn briefcase to her posture, noting the way she sat, with perfect balance. Feet flat on the floor, hands relaxed but ready. Webb had processed enough personnel through this office to recognize when something didn't fit. Civilian consultants usually came in nervous, overeager, trying too hard to prove they belonged. This woman sat like someone who'd already proven everything she needed to, and had nothing left to demonstrate. The morning briefing began in the main conference room. 20 officers crowded around a large table covered with case files, evidence logs, and legal memoranda. Captain Morrison held court at the head of the table, his voice dominating the space. "The Henderson case is simple," he announced. "The prosecution has overcharged. They're trying to make an example out of a good sailor who made one mistake. We'll tear their case apart piece by piece." Commander Park, sitting opposite him, kept his expression neutral. "The evidence is substantial, Captain. Petty Officer Henderson knowingly falsified maintenance records on critical aircraft systems. That's not a small mistake, it's a crime that endangered lives." Morrison waved his hand dismissively. "Alleged falsification. And even if he did alter some records, the prosecution can't prove intent. That's where you'll fail, Commander. Intent is everything in military law." Elena sat near the back of the room, notebook open, pen resting lightly in her hand. She hadn't written anything yet. She was simply listening, watching the dynamics unfold. Lieutenant Commander Reeves noticed. Most people in briefings either scribbled frantically or zoned out entirely. This woman did neither. She absorbed everything with focused attention, her eyes moving from speaker to speaker, tracking not just the words but the subtext beneath them. Morrison continued his monologue, growing more animated. "The manual for courts-martial is clear on this point. Without direct evidence of criminal intent, you can't sustain a conviction on Article 107. It's foundational military justice." Elena's pen twitched slightly. Just once. A tiny movement that only someone watching closely would catch. Park leaned forward. "Captain, with respect, Article 107 doesn't require the same level of intent as civilian fraud cases. The UCMJ standard is—" "I know what the UCMJ standard is, Commander." Morrison interrupted, his tone sharp. "I've been practicing military law since before you passed the bar. The standard is knowingly false, and you can't prove knowingly without evidence of intent." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Several junior officers stared at their notes, unwilling to enter the crossfire between two senior attorneys. Elena's eyes never left Morrison. She had stopped breathing for just a moment, the way someone does when they hear something profoundly wrong but aren't yet ready to correct it. Because Morrison was wrong. Completely, fundamentally wrong about the legal standard. And everyone in that room with actual trial experience knew it, but no one was willing to contradict the senior defense counsel in front of a civilian observer. The briefing concluded, and officers filed out quickly, eager to escape the tension. Elena stood slowly, closing her notebook without having written a single word inside it. Everything she needed was already memorized. As she moved toward the door, Chief Webb approached quietly. "Ma'am, can I get you anything? Coffee? Access to the law library?" "The library would be helpful, Chief," Elena said. "Thank you." Webb studied her for a moment longer. "You've been in military courtrooms before." It wasn't a question. Elena met his eyes with a small, knowing smile. "A few times." "Thought so," Webb said. "You don't move like a civilian." He escorted her down the hallway to the law library, a windowless room lined floor to ceiling with regulations, case law, and legal treatises. The smell of old paper and binding glue filled the air. "Make yourself at home, ma'am," Webb said. "Most people find it overwhelming at first." Elena stepped inside, her eyes scanning the shelves with immediate recognition. United States Code. Title 10. Manual for Courts Martial. 2023 edition. Military Justice Reporter volumes dating back 40 years. The Supreme Court Military Justice Section. Her hand drifted to a specific volume without hesitation. The MCM. Rule for Courts Martial. 307. She pulled it from the shelf, flipped directly to the section on Article 107, and ran her finger down the page to the exact paragraph that contradicted everything Morrison had said in the briefing. Webb watched from the doorway, his suspicion deepening. That wasn't how someone unfamiliar with military law moved. That was muscle memory. That was expertise so ingrained it became instinct. Elena caught him watching and smiled politely. "Thank you, Chief. This is perfect." Webb nodded slowly and stepped back into the hallway. As he walked back to his desk, one thought echoed in his mind. Whoever that woman is, she's not just a consultant. The courtroom was smaller than civilian courts, but carried the same weight of authority. Wood-paneled walls, the American flag and Navy flag flanking the judge's bench. Rows of chairs for witnesses and observers. The smell of furniture polish mixed with the faint scent of nervous sweat from the accused sailor sitting ramrod straight at the defense table. Petty Officer Second Class David Henderson looked young, too young to be facing a potential dishonorable discharge and 5 years in military prison. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. Elena entered quietly and took a seat in the back row. The observer section. Captain Morrison was already at the defense table, arranging his files with theatrical precision. Commander Park sat at the prosecution table with Lieutenant Commander Reeves, both focused intently on their notes. The bailiff called the room to attention. "All rise." Everyone stood as Commander Douglas Hartman entered the fay, military judge presiding over the case. He was in his early 50s, gray at the temples, with the exhausted look of someone who'd seen too many young sailors destroy their careers over avoidable mistakes. "Be seated," Hartman said, his voice carrying natural authority. "We're convened today for the General Court-Martial of Petty Officer Second Class David Henderson, United States Navy. Counsel, state your appearances." Park stood first. "Commander James Park, Judge Advocate General's Corps, Trial Counsel for the United States." Morrison rose slowly, letting the moment breathe. "Captain Bradley Morrison, Judge Advocate General's Corps, Defense Counsel for Petty Officer Henderson." Hartman nodded. "Very well. Commander Park, you may proceed with opening statements." Park's opening was competent, methodical, painting a picture of systematic falsification. Henderson had altered maintenance logs on FA-18 aircraft over a 6-month period, hiding corrosion issues that should have grounded the planes. The evidence was substantial. Digital records, testimony from other maintenance personnel, Henderson's own signed statements. Then Morrison stood for his opening statement, and the tone in the room shifted. "Your Honor, what we have here is a witch hunt," Morrison began, his voice dripping with indignation. "The prosecution wants you to believe that my client, a dedicated sailor with 4 years of exemplary service, suddenly decided to become a criminal. Why? Because he made some paperwork errors under intense pressure. Because he was trying to keep aircraft mission ready in an undermanned squadron." He paced slowly, gesturing dramatically. "The law is clear, Your Honor. Article 107 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice requires specific intent. The prosecution must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Petty Officer Henderson knowingly and intentionally made false statements. Not that he made mistakes. Not that he was careless. But that he had criminal intent." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her pen tapped once against her notebook. Morrison continued, building momentum. "And they cannot meet that burden. Because the evidence will show that Henderson was a good sailor caught in an impossible situation, doing his best to keep planes flying. This case should never have been brought, and I'm confident you'll see that by the end of this trial." He sat down, satisfied with his performance. Commander Park stood for rebuttal. "Your Honor, the defense is misstating the legal standard." Article 107 does not require Morrison, interrupted, still seated. I'm not misstating anything, Commander. Perhaps you need to review your basic military justice principles. Hartman's eyes sharpened. Captain Morrison, you'll have your chance to respond. Let Commander Park finish. Morrison held up his hands in mock apology. Of course, Your Honor. My apologies. Park continued, voice tight. The Article 107 standard is knowingly false, meaning the problem, he accused, knew the statement was false when he made it. It does not require proof of specific intent to harm or defraud. That's a fundamental distinction in military law. Morrison stood again, unable to contain himself. Your Honor, if I may, the commander is splitting hairs. Knowingly false and specific intent are functionally the same in this context. They weren't. Anyone who'd actually studied military appellate decisions knew they weren't. But Morrison spoke with such confidence, such certainty, that the inexperienced might believe him. Elena closed her eyes briefly, exhaling slowly through her nose. This was worse than she'd expected. The trial continued through the morning. Witnesses testified. Evidence was introduced. Morrison cross-examined with theatrical flair, scoring minor points but missing the larger legal issues. Park methodically built his case, brick by brick. During a brief recess, Elena stood in the hallway, reviewing her notes. Lieutenant Commander Reeves approached, curiosity finally overcoming protocol. Miss Vasquez, right? Reeves asked. You're here observing for whom exactly? Just a general assessment, Elena said carefully. Looking at how military justice operates at the regional level. Reeves nodded slowly. And what's your assessment so far? Elena chose her words carefully. Captain Morrison is confident. Reeves smiled thinly. That's diplomatic. He's also wrong about half the law he's citing. But no one wants to correct him in open court. Why not? Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. Because he's senior. Because he has the ear of the admiral. Because crossing him means getting frozen out of good assignments. Reeves looked tired suddenly. That's just how it works sometimes. Elena said nothing, but her expression conveyed understanding. She'd seen this pattern countless times, competence held hostage by politics. Truth suppressed by hierarchy. Morrison emerged from the courtroom, spotted them, talking, and strode over with aggressive friendliness. Miss Vasquez, he said, smiling broadly. I hope you're learning something about real military trial work. This isn't like civilian court where you can hide behind technicalities. This is about leadership, presence, commanding the room. It's certainly educational. Elena replied neutrally. Morrison clapped her lightly on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem friendly but carried clear condescension. Stick around. You might actually learn what top-tier advocacy looks like. He walked away, already chatting with another officer, his laughter echoing down the corridor. Reeves watched him go, then turned to Elena. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. He treats everyone like that, anyone he doesn't consider an equal. And who does he consider an equal? Elena asked. Reeves thought for a moment. Pretty much just himself. The afternoon session brought more of the same. Morrison objected constantly, citing case law that didn't actually support his arguments. Judge Hartman overruled him repeatedly, growing more visibly frustrated with each mischaracterization of military jurisprudence. During one particularly egregious moment, Morrison argued that United States v. Kemp, a landmark military appeals case, supported his interpretation of the evidence standard. Elena's hand tightened on her pen. She knew that case intimately. Morrison was citing it backwards, using the dissent as if it were the majority opinion. Judge Hartman leaned forward. Captain Morrison, I believe you're misreading Kemp. The holding was quite clear on the standard for Article 107 violations. Morrison smiled condescendingly. With respect, Your Honor, I've argued this issue before the Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals. I know Kemp inside and out. Then perhaps you could cite the specific page and paragraph you're referencing, Hartman said dryly. Morrison hesitated for just a fraction of a second, the pause of someone who'd been called on a bluff. "Your Honor, I don't have the volume number memorized, but I can provide it after the recess." "Please do," Hartman said flatly. Elena sat very still, her notebook now open. On the page, in precise legal shorthand, she'd written, U.S. v. Kemp, 46 M.J. 152. 157C. A. F. 1997. Knowingly false standard does not require proof of specific intent to deceive. Knowledge of falsity sufficient. Morrison citing dissent, not majority. Below that, she'd added 3 more case citations that directly contradicted Morrison's arguments, complete with page numbers and relevant quotes. Chief Webb, standing near the back of the courtroom in his role as legal administrator, caught a glimpse of her notes when she shifted in her seat. His eyes widened slightly. Those weren't the notes of an observer. Those were the notes of an appellate attorney, someone who knew military case law so thoroughly they could cite volume numbers, page numbers, and holdings from memory. The recess was called. As people filed out, Morrison approached Judge Hartman's clerk with a request for the law library. He needed to look up the Kemp citation, which meant he didn't actually have it memorized as he'd claimed. Elena remained seated, making no move to help, offering no correction. She simply watched, her expression unreadable. Commander Park approached her during the break, his frustration barely concealed. "Miss Vasquez, I have to ask, what's your legal background exactly?" Elena looked up at him calmly. "I've worked in military justice for some time, Commander." "In what capacity?" "Various roles," she said simply. Park studied her, clearly wanting to push further but held back by the uncertainty of who she might be reporting to. "If you have insights on this case, I'd appreciate hearing them." Morrison is running circles around the legal standards, and Judge Hartman can only correct him so many times before it looks like bias. Elena closed her notebook slowly. "What would you do if you knew Morrison was citing cases incorrectly?" "Call him on it," Park said immediately. "But I'd need to be absolutely certain first. If I accuse a senior captain of incompetence, and I'm wrong, my career is over." "And if you're right?" Park smiled bitterly. "My career might be over anyway." That was the real problem, Elena thought. Not just Morrison's arrogance, but the system that protected it. The culture that valued rank over accuracy, seniority over expertise. She'd seen it before. She'd fought it before. And she'd been sent here specifically to see if it was happening again. "Commander," Elena said quietly, "what if I told you that Kemp holds the exact opposite of what Captain Morrison claimed?" Park's eyes sharpened. "Do you have the citation?" Elena opened her notebook and turned it toward him. His eyes scanned the page, widening with each line. This is perfect. This is exactly what I needed." He looked up at her. "How did you—" "Miss Vasquez," Morrison's voice cut across the hallway. He approached with the confident stride of someone who'd just confirmed something to his satisfaction. "I found the Kemp citation. Turns out I was right after all. I'll be presenting it when we reconvene." Elena said nothing. Morrison noticed her open notebook, glanced at it dismissively. "Taking notes? Good. Maybe you'll write a paper about this case someday. I'm always happy to serve as a teaching example." He walked away, whistling slightly. Park looked at Elena, realization dawning slowly. "He's going to cite the dissent, isn't he?" "Yes," Elena said simply. "And when he does, you'll need to be ready to correct him. With specificity. With authority. In a way that leaves no room for doubt." Park stared at her. "Who are you?" Elena closed her notebook and stood, smoothing her slacks. "Right now, Commander, I'm someone who believes the law should be applied correctly, regardless of who's arguing it." It wasn't an answer, but it was all she was willing to give. Not yet. The afternoon session resumed with palpable tension. Morrison returned to the courtroom carrying a single sheet of paper, his printout of the Kemp decision. He had the satisfied expression of someone who believed he'd just won an argument before it even started. Judge Hartman took his seat. "Captain Morrison, You indicated you would provide the specific citation for your earlier argument regarding United States v. Kemp. Morrison stood confidently. Yes, Your Honor. United States v. Kemp, 46 M. J. 152. The court clearly states that proof of specific intent is required when, Captain, Hartman interrupted, his patience visibly thinning. What page are you citing? Morrison glanced at his paper. Page 161. Your Honor. There was a pause. Commander Park flipped through his own copy of the case, his expression shifting from confusion to barely suppressed disbelief. Your Honor, Park said carefully. I believe Captain Morrison is citing Justice Crawford's dissenting opinion, not the majority holding. The courtroom went absolutely still. Morrison's face flushed. That's not I'm citing the main opinion, Commander. Park stood, holding his copy. Your Honor, the majority opinion is at pages 154 through 158. Page 161 is the beginning of the dissent. The actual holding states, and I quote, "The offense of making a false official statement under Article 107 requires only that the accused knew the statement was false when made. Specific intent to deceive or defraud is not an element of the offense." The color drained from Morrison's face, then flooded back as red, angry blotches. Judge Hartman leaned forward, his voice cold. Captain Morrison, are you telling this court that you cited dissenting opinion as if it were binding precedent? Your Honor, there must be some confusion. There is no confusion, Captain. Hartman's words fell like hammer blows. You have repeatedly misstated fundamental military law throughout this proceeding. That ends now. Morrison stood frozen, humiliation radiating from him in waves. Every officer in the courtroom had just witnessed a senior defense counsel make a mistake so basic it would embarrass a first-year law student. Elena sat perfectly still in the back row, her expression neutral, but Chief Webb noticed something, the tiniest exhale of relief, as if she'd been holding her breath, waiting for the truth to finally surface. Hartman continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. The correct legal standard is as Commander Park has stated. Article 107 requires knowledge of falsity, not specific intent. I will instruct the members accordingly, and counsel will tailor their arguments to the actual law. Are we clear? Yes, Your Honor, Morrison mumbled. Yes, Your Honor, Park said, barely concealing his vindication. The trial continued, but the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Morrison's swagger was gone, replaced by defensive caution. Every objection he made now was met with skeptical looks from the judge. Every argument was scrutinized for accuracy. During the next recess, Morrison stormed into the hallway, his face still burning with embarrassment. He spotted Elena sitting on a bench, notebook closed beside her. You, he said, pointing at her. You were taking notes on that case. What did you write? Elena looked up calmly. I'm sorry? Your notes. On Kemp. What did you write down? I noted the standard for Article 107, Captain. The same standard Commander Park cited. Morrison's jaw worked. So you knew. You knew I was citing the wrong section, and you just sat there. I'm here as an observer. Captain, Elena said evenly. Not a participant. An observer, Morrison repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. You know what I think? I think you're some Pentagon bureaucrat sent here to second-guess real attorneys who actually try cases. Well, let me tell you something about the real world, Captain Morrison. The voice came from Bild. Behind him, sharp and commanding, Commander Park stood in the doorway, with Lieutenant Commander Reeves beside him. Both wore expressions that clearly said Morrison was crossing a line. The judge is ready to reconvene, Park said coldly. Perhaps you should focus on your client's defense rather than interrogating observers. Morrison glared at Elena for another moment, then stormed back into the courtroom. Park approached Elena, lowering his voice. I apologize for his behavior. That was completely out of line. It's fine, Commander, Elena said. It's not fine, Reeves interjected. He's been wrong about the law all day, got publicly corrected, and now he's taking it out on you. Elena stood, gathering her briefcase. He's embarrassed. I understand. You're very gracious, Park said, studying her carefully. More gracious than he deserves. He paused. Those notes you showed me earlier, where did you study military law? Various places, Elena said with a small smile. That's not really an answer. I know. Park and Reeves exchanged glances. There was a story here. A mystery that was becoming more intriguing with each passing hour. Chief Webb appeared from around the corner, having overheard the exchange. Ma'am, I pulled those research materials you requested earlier. They're in the law library when you're ready. Thank you, Chief. As Elena walked toward the library, Webb fell into step beside her. After a moment, he spoke quietly. Ma'am, can I ask you something off the record? Of course, Chief. How many years have you been practicing military law? Elena glanced at him, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. What makes you think I practice law, Chief? Because I've been working in JAG offices for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone move through case law like you do. The way you cited that Kemp decision, volume number, page number, specific holding, that's not something you get from casual research, that's appellate-level expertise. They reached the library door. Elena paused, her hand on the handle. Chief Webb, I'm going to tell you something, and I'd appreciate if you kept it to yourself for now. Of course, ma'am. She met his eyes directly. I have been practicing military law for a while. Longer than most people in this building. How long? Long enough to know that Captain Morrison's behavior isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. For his clients, for the system, for the integrity of military justice. Webb nodded slowly. That's why you're here. Someone sent you to evaluate him. Someone sent me to evaluate the regional JAG office. Elena corrected gently. Captain Morrison is just part of that assessment. And what have you found? Elena was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I've found dedicated attorneys like Commander Park and Lieutenant Commander Reeves, who are trying to uphold the law despite working under difficult conditions. I've found competent staff like yourself who keep the system running. And I've found one arrogant officer who thinks rank means he doesn't need to know the law. Webb finished. I didn't say that, Chief. But you're thinking it. Elena smiled faintly. What I think isn't relevant yet. What matters is what I can document. She entered the library, leaving Webb in the hallway with a growing certainty. Whoever Elena Vasquez really was, she held far more authority than anyone in this building suspected. Inside the library, Elena pulled several volumes from the shelves with practiced ease. Military Justice Reporter, the Manual for Courts-Martial, relevant regulations on professional conduct for military attorneys. She didn't need to look up the information, she already knew it all. But she needed documentation, evidence. A paper trail that would support what she already knew to be true. Her hands moved across the pages with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades in these exact books. At one point, she paused at a specific case. United States v. Morrison. No relation to the captain. It was an older case, one involving prosecutorial misconduct and the standards for attorney discipline in military courts. She made a note, documenting the page number and relevant holding. As the afternoon light shifted through the small window, casting long shadows across the shelves, Elena pulled out one more volume, the JAG Corps Professional Conduct Guidelines. She opened to Section 4.2, Competence and Diligence. An attorney shall provide competent representation to a client. Competent representation requires the legal knowledge, skill, thoroughness, and preparation reasonably necessary for the representation. She traced the words with her finger, her expression growing somber. Morrison wasn't just arrogant, he was incompetent. And his incompetence was putting sailors at risk, both his own clients and the service members depending on the integrity of the military justice system. That couldn't continue. Elena closed the book and sat back in her chair, her mind working through the next steps. The question wasn't whether Morrison needed to be corrected, That was obvious. The question was how to do it in a way that protected the good attorneys like Park and Reeves, that preserved the integrity of the ongoing trial, and that sent a message throughout the JAG community that competence mattered more than rank. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Lieutenant Commander Reeves stood in the doorway. "Miss Vasquez, sorry to disturb you, but I wanted to ask, do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course. Please, sit." Reeves entered, closing the door behind her. She sat across from Elena, clearly struggling with how to begin. "I need to know something," Reeves finally said. "Who sent you here?" "Really?" Elena met her gaze steadily. "Why do you ask, Commander?" "Because you're not a consultant. Consultants don't cite case law from memory. They don't carry themselves like—" She paused, searching for words. "Like someone who's been in command. You move through this building like you own it, but you're doing it so quietly most people don't notice. And you noticed." "I did." Reeves leaned forward. "Captain Morrison is going to destroy that boy's defense because he's too arrogant to admit he doesn't know the law as well as he claims. Commander Park is trying his best, but he's terrified of making waves. And meanwhile, everyone just accepts it because that's how the system works. What would you like to see happen, Commander?" "I'd like to see someone with actual authority step in and fix this," Reeves said bluntly. "I'd like to see Morrison held accountable. I'd like to see Park get the support he deserves. I'd like to see military justice actually work the way it's supposed to." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice gentle but carrying unmistakable weight. "What if I told you that's exactly why I'm here?" Reeves's eyes widened slightly. "Then I'd ask who you really are. And I'd tell you that you'll find out soon enough." Elena stood, gathering her materials. "But in the meantime, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Keep doing your job. Keep supporting Commander Park. Keep maintaining your standards, even when it's difficult. Because people like you, people who care about getting it right, are the reason the system works at all." Reeves stood as well, something like hope flickering in her expression. "Can I ask one more question?" "Of course." "Are you going to help Henderson? That sailor, he's not a bad kid. He made a mistake." "Yes. But Morrison is making it worse by fighting the wrong legal battle." Elena's expression softened. "That trial will conclude the way the evidence and the law dictate, Commander. But I can promise you this: by the time I leave this installation, everyone will understand what competent legal representation actually looks like." It wasn't a direct answer, but for Reeves, it was enough. As evening fell over Naval Station San Diego, Elena Vasquez sat alone in the law library, surrounded by books and precedents and regulations. On the table before her sat a simple leather portfolio, one she hadn't opened yet. Inside that portfolio were documents that would change everything. Credentials that would shift every power dynamic in the building. A truth that would force accountability. But not yet. First, she needed to see how far the problems went. How many attorneys were compromised by Morrison's example? How many cases had been mishandled? How deep the rot had spread? She checked her watch, a simple silver timepiece. Military issued, with an inscription on the back that was too worn to read in the dim light. Tomorrow morning would bring the Henderson verdict. Tomorrow afternoon would bring the real reckoning. For now, Elena simply closed her books, turned off the light, and walked quietly through the empty corridors of the JAG building. No one noticed her leave. No one saw the way. She paused at the door, looking back at the courtroom where justice had been bent but not yet broken. And no one suspected that the quiet woman in civilian clothes was about to remind them all of something fundamental. In the law, truth always matters more than volume. The verdict came down on Thursday morning. The members, the military equivalent of a jury, filed back into the courtroom after 3 hours of deliberation. Their faces were difficult to read, which meant nothing and everything in military trials. Elena sat in her usual spot in the back row. Notebook closed, hands folded in her lap. Petty Officer Henderson stood at attention beside Captain Morrison, his young face pale and drawn. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. Judge Hartman addressed the panel president, a senior chief petty officer with 22 years of service. Has the panel reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. What say you? On the charge of making false official statements under Article Cit. 107, we find the accused, Petty Officer, 2nd Class David Henderson, guilty. Henderson's shoulders sagged. His mother, sitting in the front row, made a small, broken sound. The sentencing phase followed immediately. The panel recommended reduction in rank to E1, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, confinement for 18 months, and a bad conduct discharge. It was harsh, but not unexpected given the evidence. What made Elena's jaw tighten wasn't the verdict itself. Henderson had indeed falsified records, but rather Morrison's failure to mount an effective defense. He'd focused on the wrong legal standards, missed key mitigation arguments, and alienated the panel with his condescending attitude toward the enlisted members. A competent defense attorney could have negotiated a pre-trial agreement, secured a much lighter sentence, or at minimum preserved Henderson's ability to serve after punishment. Morrison's arrogance had cost his client years of his life. As the courtroom emptied, Commander Park approached Elena in the hallway. His expression was carefully neutral, but satisfaction flickered in his eyes. Justice was served, he said quietly. Was it? Elena replied, her tone gentle but pointed. Park frowned. The evidence was overwhelming. Henderson was guilty. Of the crime, yes. But was he served by his defense counsel? Did he receive the competent representation guaranteed by the Uniform Code of Military Justice? Park opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. After a moment, he said carefully, "That's a different question. It's the only question that matters now, Commander." Before Park could reply, raised voices erupted from the adjacent conference room. Morrison's voice, loud and angry, carried through the walls. "I did everything I could. If the members were too stupid to understand reasonable doubt, that's not my fault." Elena and Park exchanged glances and moved toward the doorway. Through the partially open door, they could see Morrison gesturing aggressively at Lieutenant Commander Reeves and two junior JAG officers. "You think you could have done better?" Morrison challenged. "You think your handful of years make you experts? I've been practicing law since before we passed the bar." "Yes, we know," Reeves interrupted, her patience finally breaking. "You remind us constantly. But maybe your experience has made you complacent. Captain, maybe you've forgotten that citing the correct case law actually matters." Morrison's face flushed dangerously red. "How dare you?" "She's right." The new voice came from Captain Nicole Torres, the deputy staff judge advocate who'd been observing the trial. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, expression stern. "Captain Morrison, your handling of the Henderson case was substandard. You cited dissenting opinions as precedent. You mischaracterized fundamental elements of Article 107. And your cross-examination of the government's witnesses was unfocused and ineffective." "That's your opinion," Morrison shot back. "It's not an opinion. It's an assessment based on 30 years of military legal practice." Torres stepped into the room. "And it's an assessment I'll be including in my report to the staff judge advocate." The room went deathly quiet. Morrison stared at her, disbelief warring with fury. "You're writing me up? Over one case? Over a pattern of incompetence that's been allowed to continue because of your rank and connections?" Torres said evenly. "It ends now." Elena watched from the hallway, recognizing the courage it took for Torres to make that stand. In military culture, confronting a senior officer, especially one with Morrison's political connections, could be career suicide. Morrison's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Captain Torres, I strongly suggest you reconsider. The staff judge advocate is a personal friend. My fitness reports have been outstanding for 10 years. You're a deputy making accusations against a senior defense counsel. Think very carefully about what you're doing." It was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Torres didn't flinch. "I've thought about it extensively, Captain. My duty is to the integrity of this office, not to protecting anyone's reputation. Morrison's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Elena thought he might actually become physical. But he forced himself to take a breath, then turned on his heel and stormed out, nearly colliding with Commander Park in the doorway. "Get out of my way," Morrison snarled. Park stepped aside, and Morrison disappeared down the corridor, his footsteps echoing with barely controlled rage. Torres exhaled slowly, her composure cracking just slightly. Reeves moved to her side. "Ma'am, that took guts," Reeves said quietly. "It took too long," Torres replied. "I should have documented his incompetence months ago. Years ago." She looked at the junior officers still standing in stunned silence. "Let this be a lesson. Protecting bad attorneys doesn't protect the system. It destroys it from within." Elena stepped into the doorway, drawing Torres's attention. The two women's eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or mutual understanding. "Miss Vasquez," Torres said, "I apologize that you had to witness that." "No apology necessary, Captain. I've seen worse." Torres studied her for a moment. "I suspect you have." She glanced at her watch. "I need to brief the SJA on what just happened. This is going to get complicated." She left, taking Reeves with her. The junior officers filtered out, whispering urgently among themselves. Within an hour, everyone in the JAG building would know that Morrison had been challenged and that the confrontation had been ugly. Commander Park remained in the hallway with Elena. "This is going to explode," he said quietly. "Morrison has friends at the admiral level. Torres just declared war on one of the most politically connected officers in the JAG Corps. She did her duty," Elena said simply. "Her duty might cost her career. Then the system is broken." Park looked at her sharply. "You say that like you have the authority to fix it." Elena didn't respond. She simply turned and walked back toward the law library, leaving Park staring after her with growing suspicion. The crisis came 2 hours later. Elena was reviewing case files when Chief Webb burst into the library, his usually composed face tight with urgency. "Ma'am, we have a situation." She stood immediately. "What kind of situation?" "Emergency appeal. USS Chancellorsville guided missile cruiser deployed in the Philippine Sea. One of their sailors was court-martialed last week for assaulting a superior officer. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 years confinement, dishonorable discharge, and his defense counsel just discovered that key evidence was withheld by the prosecution. Video footage that shows the assault was actually self-defense. The JAG on the ship is requesting immediate guidance because the sailor is set to be transferred to the brig tomorrow morning. Once that happens, emergency appeal becomes almost impossible." Elena's mind raced. "Who's handling the appeal here?" Webb's expression darkened. "Captain Morrison. He's the senior defense counsel. He's supposed to be reviewing the case right now and preparing the emergency stay motion." "Where is he?" "No one knows. He stormed out after the confrontation with Captain Torres. His phone is going to voicemail." Elena felt ice settle in her stomach. "How long until the transfer?" 16 hours. The motion needs to be filed within 12 to have any chance of success." "What about Commander Park? Captain Torres? Someone else?" "Park's in trial on another case. Torres is with the staff judge advocate." "And?" Webb hesitated. "Ma'am, Morrison locked his office. All the Henderson case files are in there, and the emergency appeal materials were delivered to him personally. No one else has access." The implications crashed down. A sailor's entire future hung in the balance, and the one attorney responsible for protecting him was missing, his office locked, his materials inaccessible. "Get me Captain Torres," Elena said, her voice taking on an edge of command that made Webb straighten instinctively. "Ma'am, she's in a meeting with Chief Webb." Elena's tone stopped him cold. "Get me Captain Torres now. And find someone with a master key to Morrison's office." Webb didn't question. He simply pulled out his phone and started making calls. Within 10 minutes, Torres arrived, slightly out of breath. "Miss Vasquez, Chief Webb said there's an emergency." Elena quickly explained the situation. Torres's face went pale. Dear God. Morrison is supposed to be reviewing that appeal right now. If he doesn't file by 2200 tonight, that sailor loses his only chance. Can someone else take the case? Not without the materials. And Morrison has them locked in his office. Torres pulled out her phone. I'm calling base security. We can get into his office, but it'll take time, paperwork, authorization from the staff judge advocate. How much time? 2 hours, maybe 3. That's time we don't have. Elena's mind was already moving through possibilities. What about the ship? Can they resend the materials? They're in the middle of operations. Limited communications. It took them 6 hours just to get the initial package to us via secure transmission. Torres ran her hand through her hair. This is a nightmare. If we don't file that motion, and it comes out that we had the materials but couldn't access them because of one officer's negligence. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The scandal would be catastrophic. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Lieutenant. Commander Reeves rushed in, carrying a laptop. Ma'am, I've been in contact with the ship. They can't resend the full package, but they gave me a summary of the case over secure chat. She set the laptop down, and Elena immediately leaned over to read. Her eyes moved rapidly across the screen, absorbing details with practiced speed. This is a travesty, she said quietly. The video clearly shows the petty officer was being choked by a drunk superior. He pushed the man away. That's not assault. That's self-defense. Any competent attorney would have gotten this dismissed pre-trial. Torres nodded grimly. The JAG on the ship is a junior officer. First deployment. He probably didn't know how to challenge the charges properly. And now an innocent sailor is facing 3 years in prison because 2 attorneys failed him. Elena's voice was calm, but something cold and sharp ran beneath it. That's unacceptable. I agree. But what can we do? We don't have the materials. We can't reach Morrison. And we're running out of time. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to Torres. Captain, what's the name of the staff judge advocate? Captain Richard Mendoza. Why? I need to speak with him. Immediately. Torres frowned. Miss Vasquez, with all respect, the SJA is not going to meet with a civilian consultant about an emergency appeal. He's got 3 bases under his jurisdiction and he's currently dealing with the fallout from Morrison's performance today. Then tell him, Elena said, her tone shifting into something that made everyone in the room pause, that Judge Elena Vasquez needs to speak with him about a miscarriage of justice that's about to occur on his watch. The silence that followed was absolute. Webb's eyes widened. Reeves froze mid-breath. Torres stared at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. Judge? Torres whispered. Elena reached into her briefcase and pulled out the leather portfolio she'd carried since her arrival. She opened it and removed a single document, handing it to Torres. Torres read it once, blinked, then read it again. Her face went from pale to bloodless. Oh my God, she breathed. What is it? Reeves asked, moving closer. Torres held up the document with shaking hands. This is a commission certificate. From the Judge Advocate General of the Navy, appointing Elena Vasquez as a military appellate judge for the Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals. Reeves grabbed the paper, reading frantically. Her mouth fell open. Not just that, Webb said, peering over her shoulder. Look at the date of commission. 1993, Reeves whispered. She's been a military judge for 31 years. Elena stood very still, letting the information settle over them. Torres looked up, her expression a mixture of horror and dawning understanding. You've been watching us. This whole time, you've been evaluating this office. Yes. Morrison. Oh God. Morrison has been. Torres couldn't finish the sentence. Captain Morrison has been demonstrating exactly the kind of incompetence I was sent here to assess. Elena said quietly. And now that incompetence is about to destroy an innocent sailor's life, unless we act immediately. Webb found his voice first. Ma'am, Your Honor, what do you need? Elena's demeanor shifted completely. The quiet observer vanished, replaced by something that radiated unmistakable authority. Chief Webb, I need base security to open Morrison's office immediately. Not in 2 hours. Now. Tell them a military judge has ordered it. Yes, ma'am. Webb was already dialing. Elena turned to Torres. Captain, I need you to contact the ship and tell them we're taking emergency action. Get me a secure line to their commanding officer. Right away, Your Honor. Commander Reeves. Start drafting the emergency stay motion. Basic format will fill in specifics once we have the materials. I want it ready to file within an hour. Yes, ma'am. Reeves grabbed her laptop and started typing furiously. Elena pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Admiral Chen. Robert, it's Elena Vasquez. The voice on the other end immediately shifted from casual to attentive. Judge Vasquez. What can I do for you? I need you to contact Captain Richard Mendoza, Staff Judge Advocate for Naval Base San Diego. Tell him I'm taking operational control of an emergency appeal case, and he needs to authorize whatever I require. Immediately. Done. Anything else? Put the Judge Advocate General on notice that we have a significant attorney competence issue out here that's going to require formal investigation. There was a pause. How significant? Career ending for at least one officer. Possibly systemic. Understood. I'll make the calls now. Elena hung up and looked at the 3 officers staring at her with something approaching awe. Your Honor, Torres said carefully. May I ask, who did you just call? Rear Admiral Robert Chen, Deputy Judge Advocate General of the Navy. Elena's tone was matter-of-fact. He's an old colleague. Reeves made a small, strangled sound. Now, Elena continued, we have a sailor to save. Let's move. Base security arrived within 15 minutes, a testament to the urgency conveyed by Chief Webb's call. The Master-at-Arms Chief, a burly man named Petty Officer First Class Davidson, carried a ring of keys and a look of barely contained curiosity. Ma'am, I understand we're opening Captain Morrison's office under emergency authority. Correct, Elena said. She handed him a document she'd pulled from her portfolio official orders, bearing the seal of the Judge Advocate General. This authorizes immediate access. Davidson scanned the document, his eyebrows rising steadily. You're a military appellate judge. I am. And you've been here all week. I have. Davidson looked at Torres, who nodded confirmation. He let out a low whistle. I'm guessing Captain Morrison doesn't know this. Not yet, Elena said. But he's about to. They moved quickly through the hallway to Morrison's corner office. Davidson unlocked it, and they entered to find organized chaos files stacked precariously on every surface. Half-written briefs scattered across the desk. Coffee cups forming rings on legal documents. He's a slob, Reeves muttered. He's disorganized, Elena corrected, which often correlates with sloppy legal work. Chief Webb, find the emergency appeal materials. They should have arrived this morning via secure courier. Webb moved to the desk, sorting through piles with practiced efficiency. Here, he said, holding up a thick manila envelope marked urgent. Emergency appeal. USS Chancellorsville. The envelope was unopened. Torres's face went white. He never even looked at it. No, Elena said grimly, taking the envelope. He didn't. She opened it and began pulling out documents. The trial transcript, the newly discovered video evidence, statements from witnesses, the ship JAG's emergency motion request. Her eyes moved across each page with frightening speed, absorbing and analyzing. The case is even worse than the summary suggested, she said, after several minutes. The prosecution knew about the video. It was in their evidence log but never disclosed to the defense. That's not just a Brady violation, that's prosecutorial misconduct. Torres leaned over to look. The trial counsel didn't disclose exculpatory evidence? Not only didn't disclose it, but actively concealed it. Look here. Elena pointed to an email chain. The ship's legal officer asked the trial counsel about video footage 3 days before trial. The trial counsel responded that no relevant video exists. That's a demonstrable lie. Reeves shook her head in disbelief. That trial counsel needs to be court-martialed. He will be, Elena said flatly. But first, we need to save his victim. She handed portions of the 20-FA file to each person. Reeves, I need you to pull every case in the last 5 years where Brady violations resulted in overturned convictions. Webb, get me the contact information for the Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals duty judge. Torres, draft a cover memo explaining the emergency circumstances and Morrison's failure to act. They scattered to their tasks. Elena sat at Morrison's desk, an act that would have been unthinkable hours ago but now seemed entirely natural, and began drafting the emergency motion herself. Her fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, citing cases from memory, constructing arguments with the precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times. She didn't need to look up basic procedure. She didn't need to double-check citation formats. She simply wrote, and the law poured out of her in clear, devastating logic. Within 30 minutes, she had a 15-page emergency motion that methodically demolished the original trial, exposed the prosecution's misconduct, and demanded immediate release of the wrongly convicted sailor. Torres read over her shoulder, her expression growing more amazed with each paragraph. Your Honor, this is brilliant. The legal reasoning is flawless. It's not brilliant, Captain. It's competent. It's what Morrison should have produced if he'd done his job. Elena looked up. That's the tragedy here. This isn't complex law. Any reasonably skilled attorney could have drafted this motion. But Morrison was too proud, too careless, or too incompetent to even open the envelope. A commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Raised voices, one of them unmistakably Morrison's. What the hell is going on? Why is my office open? Who authorized? He appeared in the doorway and froze, taking in the scene. Elena, sitting at his desk, his files spread out, Torres and Reeves and Webb all working urgently around her. What is this? Morrison demanded, his face flushing. This is my office. You can't just, Captain Morrison. Elena's voice cut through his bluster like a scalpel. She didn't raise her volume, didn't stand, didn't make any aggressive gesture. She simply spoke with absolute authority. We've been trying to reach you for 3 hours regarding the USS Chancellorsville emergency appeal. Morrison blinked, momentarily thrown by her tone. The what? I don't. Elena held up the unopened envelope. This arrived this morning. A sailor on the Chancellorsville was wrongly convicted due to prosecutorial misconduct. He's being transferred to the brig in, she checked her watch, 11 hours. This motion needed to be filed immediately. You never even opened the package. Morrison's face went from red to purple. You have no right to go through my files. You're a civilian consultant. No, Captain Morrison. Elena stood slowly, and something in her bearing made him take an involuntary step back. I'm not. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a small, leather credential case. She flipped it open, holding it at eye level so Morrison could see clearly. The case contained a military ID card and a badge. United States Navy Judge Advocate General's Corps. Below her photo, the rank was clearly visible. Military Appellate Judge. Oh, 6 equivalent. Morrison stared at it, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. My name is Elena Vasquez, she said quietly. I'm a military appellate judge for the Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals. I was appointed in 1993 and have presided over more than 2,000 cases in military justice. The color drained from Morrison's face so quickly he looked like he might faint. I've been here for the past week conducting an assessment of this regional JAG office. I've observed your courtroom performance, reviewed your case files, and evaluated your legal competence. She paused, letting each word land with weight. And I've found it severely deficient. Morrison's hands trembled. I didn't. No one told me. No one told you because the entire point was to see how you performed when you thought no one important was watching. Elena's tone remained calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it more devastating. You failed, Captain. Not just failed, you demonstrated a pattern of incompetence that has put countless sailors at risk. Commander Park appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene, saw Elena's credentials, and his eyes went wide. Judge Vasquez, he breathed. Commander Park. Elena nodded to him. Good timing. I need you to review this emergency motion before we file it. She handed him the document. Park scanned it rapidly, his expression shifting from confusion to comprehension to something like wonder. This is, Your Honor, this is exactly what needed to be filed. The legal analysis is perfect. It's not perfect, Commander, but it's competent, which is more than can be said for much of the work I've observed this week. Morrison found, his voice, though it came out strained and desperate. Your Honor, I can explain. You can explain to the investigation board. Elena interrupted. Captain Torres, please ensure Captain Morrison understands he's not to touch any files, delete any documents, or communicate with any witnesses until the formal investigation begins. Yes, Your Honor, Torres said, barely concealing her satisfaction. Morrison looked around the room wildly, seeing only stern faces and crossed arms. This is. You can't do this. I have friends. The Admiral. The Admiral is being briefed by the Deputy Judge Advocate General as we speak, Elena said, along with the Judge Advocate General herself. By tomorrow morning, everyone from here to Washington will know about your conduct. She turned her back on him, effectively dismissing him, and focused on her laptop. Commander Park, I need you to file this motion with the appellate court within the hour. Chief Webb, coordinate with the Chancellorsville to ensure they understand relief is coming. Captain Torres, begin documenting everything for the formal investigation. Your Honor, Park said hesitantly. Shouldn't Captain Morrison file the motion? He's the defense counsel of record. Elena looked up, and Park actually took a step back at the cold fury in her eyes. Commander, Captain Morrison has demonstrated through his actions that he cannot be trusted with this sailor's future. I'm filing the motion myself, under my own authority, as an appellate judge. The court will accept it. She returned to her work, typing rapidly. Behind her, Morrison stood frozen in the doorway, his entire world collapsing around him. Petty Officer Davidson, the security chief, spoke quietly. Sir, I think you should come with me. Morrison looked at him blankly. What? Sir, you need to leave this area. Now. Morrison glanced around one more time at Elena working calmly at his desk, at Torres organizing his files for investigation, at Park and Reeves, reviewing legal documents he'd never bothered to read, at Chief Webb methodically documenting every piece of evidence, at his career ending in real time. He turned and walked out, his footsteps heavy and defeated. The moment he was gone, Park let out a breath he'd been holding. Your Honor, I don't even know what to say. Elena looked up, her expression softening slightly. Say you'll help me finish this motion so we can save an innocent sailor. Of course. Absolutely. Park pulled up a chair. What do you need? For the next hour, they worked with focused intensity. Elena drafted, Park reviewed, Reeves researched, supporting cases, Torres coordinated with the ship, and Webb kept everyone supplied with coffee and updated information. It was, Chief Webb thought as he watched them work, exactly what a JAG office should look like. Competent attorneys collaborating to ensure justice. No egos, no politics, just the law applied correctly. At 1,945 hours with just over 2 hours to spare, before the deadline, Elena hit the final key and sat back. It's done. Park read through the completed motion one last time, then looked at her with undisguised admiration. Your Honor, this is going to be cited in casebooks. This is textbook appellate advocacy. Let's hope it's persuasive enough to free an innocent sailor. Elena replied. File it immediately. Park uploaded the motion to the appellate court's electronic filing system. Within minutes, confirmation came back. Filing accepted. Emergency review scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. Torres's phone rang. She answered, listened, then smiled. The Chancellorsville just received notification. They're delaying the transfer pending the court's ruling. Your Honor, you did it. Elena shook her head. We did it. All of us. This is what happens when attorneys focus on the mission instead of their egos. Reeves spoke quietly. Your Honor, can I ask? Why didn't you reveal who you were earlier? You could have stopped Morrison days. Elena was silent for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Because I needed to see the full extent of the problem. If I'd intervened immediately, Morrison would have claimed it was an isolated incident, a misunderstanding. But by watching him for a week, by documenting pattern after pattern of incompetence, by letting him demonstrate his true character when he thought no one important was watching, she paused. Now there's no defense, no excuse, just the truth. And the truth is going to end his career, Park said. The truth is going to protect every future client who would have been harmed by his incompetence. Elena corrected gently. That's what matters. Not his career, not his reputation, but the sailors and Marines who depend on competent legal representation. Webb stepped forward. Your Honor, if I may, speaking for the enlisted side of this office. Thank you. We've watched Captain Morrison get away with this for years because no one with the authority was willing to challenge him. You did what needed to be done. Elena stood and extended her hand. Webb shook it, and then instinctively, automatically he snapped to attention and rendered a crisp salute. It wasn't protocol. Civilians didn't get saluted, and judges in civilian clothes weren't normally saluted. But the gesture carried a weight that had nothing to do with regulation and everything to do with respect. Elena returned the salute with equal precision. Thank you, Chief. Your professionalism throughout this process has been exemplary. Park and Reeves exchanged glances. Then, simultaneously, they came to attention and saluted as well. Torres was last. Her salute held just a fraction longer than necessary. Your Honor, it's been an absolute privilege to watch you work. Elena looked at the four of them, these dedicated attorneys and staff who'd kept doing their jobs well despite a toxic command climate, who'd maintained their standards even when it would have been easier to give up. The privilege is mine, she said quietly. You've reminded me why I chose this career in the first place. Word spread through the JAG building with the speed of wildfire in dry brush. By 2100 hours, everyone from the newest paralegal to the staff judge advocate knew. The quiet civilian consultant was actually one of the most senior military judges in the Navy. And she'd just destroyed Captain Morrison's career while simultaneously saving an innocent sailor. Captain Richard Mendoza, the staff judge advocate, arrived at 2130 hours. He was a lean man in his mid-50s with silver hair and the cautious eyes of someone who'd navigated 30 years of military politics. He entered Morrison's former office, now effectively Elena's command post, with the expression of someone approaching a live grenade. Judge Vasquez, he said formally, I apologize for not getting here sooner. I was in meetings when Admiral Chen contacted me. Elena stood, offering her hand. Captain Mendoza, no apology necessary. They shook hands, and Mendoza immediately noted her firm grip and direct eye contact, the hallmarks of someone completely comfortable with authority. Ma'am, I need to understand exactly what's happened here. For the next 20 minutes, Elena walked him through everything. Her arrival, Morrison's behavior, the Henderson trial, the confrontation with Torres, and finally the emergency appeal crisis. She presented documentation for each point, her own notes, case transcripts, witness statements from Torres and Reeves. The unopened emergency appeal envelope. Mendoza's face grew progressively more grim as the briefing continued. This is catastrophic, he finally said. If word gets out that one of my senior defense counsel was this incompetent, Word is already out, Captain, Elena interrupted gently. Admiral Chen is briefing the Judge Advocate General tonight. By tomorrow morning, this will be known at the highest levels of the JAG Corps. Mendoza closed his eyes briefly. My career is over. Why do you say that? Because this happened on my watch. I'm the SJA. I should have caught this. I should have supervised more closely. Should have reviewed Morrison's cases. Should have Captain Mendoza. Elena's tone was kind but firm. Unless you actively enabled Morrison's behavior, you're not at fault here. Senior officers are presumed to be competent unless proven otherwise. Morrison exploited that presumption. You couldn't have known without specific red flags. Captain Torres tried to raise concerns, Mendoza admitted. 6 months ago, she said Morrison was cutting corners, that his trial prep was sloppy. I told her she was being too critical. That Morrison had a proven track record. And that's a lesson you'll carry forward. Elena said. But it doesn't make you culpable for his actions. Mendoza looked at her with something like hope. You really believe that? I believe in proportional accountability, Captain. Morrison will face consequences for his actions. You'll face questions about your supervision. But there's a distinction between negligent oversight and active misconduct. She pulled out another document from her briefcase. This is my preliminary assessment of the regional JAG office. I'm recommending enhanced supervision protocols, mandatory peer review of complex cases, and regular competency evaluations for all senior counsel. But I'm also recommending that Commander Park be promoted to Senior Defense Counsel and that Captain Torres be given a superior fitness report for her courage in challenging Morrison despite the personal risk. Mendoza read the document, his expression shifting from dread to cautious relief. You're not recommending my relief. Should I be? Some might say yes. Some might say a lot of things, Elena replied. I say you have dedicated attorneys like Park, Torres, and Reeves working for you, and a competent staff like Chief Webb supporting operations. That suggests you're doing something right. You made one mistake, trusting Morrison too much. Learn from it and move forward. Mendoza's shoulders sagged with released tension. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Captain. You're going to have months of investigations, remediation, and oversight. Your life is about to become very difficult. But my career isn't over. Not unless you fail to learn from this. Elena confirmed. A knock at the door interrupted them. Commander Park stood in the doorway, holding his phone with a strange expression. Your Honor, I just received a call from the Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals. They've granted the emergency stay. The sailor on the Chancellorsville won't be transferred to the brig. A cheer went up from the enlisted clerks in the outer office who'd been anxiously awaiting news. And, Park continued, the court is ordering an expedited full review of the case with oral arguments scheduled in 2 weeks. The trial counsel who withheld evidence has been relieved of duty pending investigation. Elena nodded, satisfied. Good. Justice is starting to move in the right direction. There's more, Park said. The presiding judge for the appellate panel is Judge Captain Sarah Chen. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. Really? Interesting. You know her? Sarah Chen and I served together for 15 years. She's one of the finest legal minds in the Navy. Elena smiled faintly. And she doesn't tolerate prosecutorial misconduct. That trial counsel is going to wish he'd never passed the bar. Reeves appeared behind Park, slightly out of breath. Your Honor, you need to see this. She held up her phone, showing an email from the Judge Advocate General's office. The subject line read, Immediate. Regional JAG Competency Review. Elena scanned it quickly. The JAG herself was ordering a comprehensive review of every case Morrison had handled in the past 5 years, with particular attention to potential wrongful convictions or inadequate defense. Retry F. Continue representation. A team of senior military judges would arrive within 72 hours to begin the assessment. 5 years of cases, Mendoza said quietly, his face pale. That's Hundreds of cases. Potentially hundreds of sailors who didn't receive adequate representation. Yes, Elena said simply. Which is why this matters, Captain. It's not about punishing Morrison. It's about fixing the damage he caused. Torres entered, carrying a thick folder. Your Honor, I've compiled a preliminary list of Morrison's cases that raised red flags. Clients who complained about inadequate communication, trials where he missed obvious defenses, plea agreements that seemed disproportionately harsh. She set the folder on the desk. There are 43 cases in just the past 18 months. The room fell silent as the magnitude settled over them. 43, Park repeated. 43 sailors whose lives might have been derailed because one attorney was too arrogant to do his job properly. Elena opened the folder and began scanning the case summaries. Her expression grew darker with each page. This one, she said, pointing. Petty Officer Martinez. Court-martialed for unauthorized absence, 3 months confinement. But look at the circumstances. His wife was in a severe car accident. He requested emergency leave. His chain of command denied it. So he went anyway. That's a clear mitigation argument, Reeves said. Any competent attorney would have negotiated that down to non-judicial punishment at most. Morrison didn't even try, Torres added. I remember that case. Martinez tried to explain the circumstances, and Morrison told him to stop making excuses and just plead guilty. Elena flipped to another case. Seaman Chen, reduction in rank and forfeiture of pay for alleged theft of government property. But the theft was taking home a damaged keyboard that was scheduled to be thrown away. A $10 item that was literally being discarded. Park shook his head in disbelief. That case should never have gone to court-martial. That's maybe an administrative counseling at most. Morrison told Chen to take the deal or risk going to trial, where he'd face maximum punishment. Torres said, her voice tight with anger. The kid was terrified, so he pleaded guilty to a crime that destroyed his career over essentially garbage. Elena continued through the files, each case more damning than the last. Clients who'd tried to fire Morrison but were told they couldn't. Families who'd begged for him to investigate exculpatory evidence but were ignored. Commanding officers who'd expressed concern about his lack of preparation but were dismissed. This isn't just incompetence, Elena said finally, her voice hard. This is systematic neglect bordering on malpractice. Captain Morrison took an oath to zealously defend his clients. He violated that oath repeatedly, and dozens of sailors paid the price. Mendoza sat heavily in a chair. What do we do, Your Honor? We fix it, Elena said. Every case in this folder gets reviewed. Every sailor who was inadequately represented gets contacted and informed of their right to appeal. Every wrongful conviction gets corrected. She looked around the room. This is going to take months, maybe years. But it will be done, Your Honor, Chief Webb said from the doorway. I hate to interrupt, but there's someone here asking for you. Who? Captain Morrison. Ma'am. He's in the waiting area. He's requesting a meeting. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Elena closed the folder carefully. Show him in, Chief. Are you sure? Torres asked. After everything, he deserves the chance to speak, Elena said quietly. I won't become like him by denying someone their voice. Webb returned moments later with Morrison. The change in the man was striking. The swagger was gone, replaced by hunched shoulders, red-rimmed eyes. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 3 hours. Your Honor, he said, his voice hoarse. May I speak with you privately? Elena considered, then nodded. Everyone else, please wait outside. Captain Mendoza, you may stay. The others filed out reluctantly, clearly wanting to witness this confrontation. When the door closed, Morrison seemed to deflate further. Your Honor, I don't know where to start. The beginning is usually best. Captain. Morrison swallowed hard. I didn't know who you were. I would never have. If I'd known. That's precisely the problem, Elena interrupted gently. You would have behaved differently if you'd known I held authority. But your treatment of me dismissive, condescending, arrogant. That's how you treat everyone you perceive as beneath you, including your clients. Morrison flinched but didn't argue. I want you to understand something, Elena continued. My assessment of your competence has nothing to do with how you treated me personally. I can handle disrespect, but your clients, young sailors who trusted you with their futures, they couldn't. They depended on you, and you failed them. I know, Morrison whispered. I know that now. I got comfortable. I thought because I'd won so many cases early in my career, I didn't need to work as hard anymore. I thought my experience was enough. Experience without continued diligence is just accumulated bad habits, Elena said. You stopped learning, stopped caring, stopped seeing your clients as human beings who deserved your best effort. I'm sorry, Morrison said, and tears actually leaked from his eyes. I'm so sorry. Those sailors, Martinez, Chen, Henderson, I destroyed their lives because I was lazy and arrogant, and I can never fix that. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying him. The anger, the contrition, the devastation, it all seemed genuine. But sincerity after being caught didn't erase the damage. Captain Morrison, I'm going to be very clear with you about what happens next. The Judge Advocate General is ordering a full review of your cases. Every inadequately defended sailor will be contacted. Many will likely have their convictions overturned or sentences reduced. Some will sue for damages. Your actions will haunt the JAG Corps for years. Morrison nodded miserably. You will face a board of inquiry regarding your fitness to continue as a military attorney. Based on my observations and the documented evidence, I will be recommending revocation of your license to practice military law and administrative separation from the service. Morrison's face crumbled. My career is over. Your career as a military attorney is over, Elena corrected. What you do next is up to you. You could fight the findings, make excuses, blame others. Or, you could accept responsibility, cooperate fully with the investigations, and try to make whatever amends are possible. What would you do, Your Honor? Elena considered. I would start by writing personal letters of apology to every client I failed. I would cooperate completely with every review and investigation. I would volunteer to testify in any appeal hearing where my incompetence contributed to a wrongful outcome. And I would use whatever time I had left in service to train junior attorneys on what not to do, to be a cautionary tale that might prevent others from making my mistakes. Morrison looked at her with something like gratitude. You're giving me a path forward. I'm giving you a chance to leave with some dignity and tact. Elena said. Whether you take it is your choice. Morrison stood, straightened his uniform with trembling hands, and came to attention. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand in a salute. Elena returned it with equal precision. Thank you, Your Honor, Morrison said quietly. I don't deserve your guidance, but I'll follow it. He turned and walked out, leaving Elena and Mendoza alone in the heavy 17. Silence. That was remarkably gracious, Mendoza observed. That was strategic, Elena replied. An angry, defensive Morrison would obstruct investigations and poison the command climate further. A repentant Morrison who cooperates might actually help us fix the damage he caused. Still, you could have destroyed him completely. Destroying people isn't my mission, Captain. Protecting the integrity of military justice is. She stood and gathered her materials. Now, I have a report to write. I'll need a secure office and access to all case files going back 5 years. You'll have whatever you need, Your Honor. As midnight approached, Elena sat alone in a borrowed office, surrounded by stacks of case files and depositions. The building was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of security patrols. She pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. Chen, the voice answered. Sarah, it's Elena. I hear you're presiding over the Chancellorsville appeal. I am. I also heard you're the one who rescued that case from oblivion. Nice work. It shouldn't have been necessary, Elena said wearily. But it was. And you did it. That sailor gets to go home to his family because you were paying attention. Sarah paused. How bad is it out there? Worse than the initial reports suggested. We're looking at potentially dozens of wrongful convictions or excessive sentences. It's going to be a mess. Do you need help? Elena smiled at the phone. Actually, yes. I need someone I trust to review the appellate aspects of these cases. Someone who won't pull punches, won't be swayed by politics, and won't let guilty officers escape accountability. You're describing yourself. I'm describing you too, Sarah. Will you take point on the appellate review? There was a pause. You know this is going to make enemies. Morrison has friends. People are going to say we're on a witch hunt. Let them say it. We'll have documentation, evidence, and the law on our side. Then yes. Send me the case list. I'll start reviewing tomorrow. Thank you. Elena? Sarah's voice softened. How are you holding up? This can't be easy. Seeing the system fail this badly. Elena looked at the stacks of files, each one representing a sailor whose life had been derailed by an attorney who'd stopped caring. I'm angry, she admitted. But I'm also hopeful. Because I met attorneys like Park and Torres and Reeves, who are still doing it right despite everything. The system is damaged, but it's not broken. Not yet. Then let's make sure it stays that way. They said good night, and Elena returned to her files. She worked through the night, documenting each case, noting patterns, building the comprehensive report that would reshape military justice oversight for the next decade. At 0300, Chief Webb found her still working. Your Honor, you should rest. I will, Chief. After I finish this section. Webb set a fresh cup of coffee on her desk. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you really come here? I mean, I understand the official reason assessment of regional JAG operations. But there are a dozen other bases you could have chosen. Why this one? Elena was quiet for a moment. Because 3 months ago, a sailor named Marcus Webb. Any relation? Webb's eyes widened. My nephew. Your nephew was court-martialed for negligent dereliction of duty after a maintenance error. He was sentenced to 6 months confinement and a bad conduct discharge. His attorney was Captain Morrison. Webb sat down slowly. I tried to help him. Tried to find him a better attorney. But Morrison was assigned, and Marcus couldn't afford to hire civilian counsel. Your nephew sent a letter to the Judge Advocate General's office. It was passed to me for review. I read about his case, about how Morrison had failed to investigate, failed to call witnesses, failed to challenge the prosecution's timeline. I saw a young sailor being railroaded by an incompetent attorney. What happened? Webb asked quietly. I called in favors. Got his case reviewed by the appellate court. They found Morrison's performance constituted ineffective assistance of counsel. Marcus's conviction was overturned 2 weeks ago. Webb's hand went to his mouth. Oh my God. I didn't know. Marcus didn't tell me. Because I asked him not to. I told him I was conducting a broader investigation, and I needed his case to remain confidential until I completed my assessment. Elena met his eyes. Your nephew's letter saved potentially dozens of other sailors, Chief. He had the courage to speak up when no one else would. Tears ran down Webb's face. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for listening when everyone else ignored us. Thank you for raising a nephew brave enough to fight for justice, even when the system failed him. Webb stood and saluted, a gesture of profound respect and gratitude. Elena returned it, and for a moment, they stood in silent acknowledgement of the battle they'd both fought, each in their own way, to protect the integrity of military justice. When Webb left, Elena returned to her work. But now, the exhaustion felt lighter. The weight of 43 cases, of dozens of failed defenses, of one attorney's systematic negligence, it was balanced by the knowledge that the system could still self-correct, that justice, delayed and difficult, could still prevail, that even in the darkest failures, there were people like Webb and Park and Torres and Reeves who refused to give up. She worked until dawn broke over Naval Station San Diego, until the first morning light cast long shadows across the files that would reshape military justice. And when she finally closed her laptop and gathered her materials, Elena Vasquez, military appellate judge, defender of the accused, guardian of justice, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The hardest part was done. Tomorrow would bring the formal reckoning. Tomorrow, everyone would know exactly who she was and what she'd found. Tomorrow, accountability would finally arrive. The formal briefing where Elena's findings are presented to senior leadership. The mass salute moment as the entire JAG community recognizes her authority and sacrifice. Morrison's final confrontation and departure. The masses ask complete this way. Transformation of the office under new leadership. Elena's quiet departure and lasting legacy, the powerful closing that ties everything together. This will be approximately 4,000 to 5,000 words, bringing the total to around 18,000 to 19,000 words, longer than initially planned. But the story demanded the depth. Would you like me to complete Part 3? Retrieve Part 3. Part 3. The Reckoning. The morning briefing was scheduled for 800 inches, the main conference room. By 07:30, the hallway outside was packed with personnel, not just from the JAG office, but from across the base. Word had spread through the overnight watchstanders, through the enlisted mess, through the junior officer, berthing areas. A military judge had been working undercover. Captain Morrison had been exposed. Justice was finally being served. Elena arrived at 07:45, dressed now in her service dress blues for the first time since her arrival. The transformation was startling. Gone was the unassuming civilian consultant in gray slacks and plain blouse. In her place stood a Navy commander equivalent rank to a military judge, with rows of ribbons spanning her chest, warfare devices gleaming above them, and 31 years of service evident in every crisp line of her uniform. The crowd in the hallway parted instinctively as she approached, personnel straightening automatically even before recognizing who she was. Chief Webb stood near the conference room door and snapped to attention the moment he saw her. "Your Honor," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed warmth. "The conference room is ready." "Thank you, Chief." As Elena passed, Webb held his salute until she returned it. Then, spontaneously, the young petty officer beside him saluted as well. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire hallway was filled with saluting sailors and officers, not because protocol demanded it, but because respect compelled it. Elena moved slowly down the gauntlet, returning each salute with precision and dignity, making eye contact with each person, acknowledging their gesture with the gravity it deserved. Lieutenant Commander Reeves stood near the conference room entrance. Her own salute held steady. As Elena approached, Reeves spoke quietly. "Your Honor, there are admirals in that room. Flag officers from across the region. The Judge Advocate General is on video conference. And..." She hesitated. "Captain Morrison is present. He requested permission to attend." Elena nodded once. "Good. He should be here." She entered the conference room, and the effect was immediate. Every person in the room, from the newest ensign to the two-star admiral sitting at the head of the table, rose to attention. "Seats, please," Elena said calmly. They sat, but the energy in the room remained electric. Elena recognized several faces. Rear Admiral Patricia Sutton, commander of Naval Legal Service Command Pacific. Captain Mendoza, looking exhausted but resolute. Commander Park and Lieutenant Commander Reeves, positioned near the presentation equipment. And in the back corner, Captain Bradley Morrison, sitting ramrod straight with the expression of a man awaiting judgment. On the large screen at the front of the room, Vice Admiral Margaret Hartwell appeared, the Judge Advocate General of the Navy herself. She was in her early 60s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every variation of military justice issue imaginable. "Judge Vasquez," the JAG said formally, "the floor is yours." Elena moved to the front of the room, connecting her laptop to the presentation system. The first slide appeared. Regional JAG Office Assessment. Competency and Integrity. Review. Admiral Hartwell, Admiral Sutton. Distinguished Officers. Elena began, her voice carrying clear authority without volume. For the past 7 days, I have conducted an undercover assessment of the regional JAG office here at Naval Station San Diego. What I discovered represents both a significant failure of attorney competence and a systemic breakdown in supervisory oversight. She clicked to the next slide. A photograph of the unopened emergency appeal envelope. This envelope arrived at 0830 on Thursday morning. It contained an emergency appeal from USS Chancellorsville, where a sailor had been wrongly convicted due to prosecutorial misconduct. The defense counsel assigned to handle the appeal, Captain Bradley Morrison, never opened it. When we gained access to his office at 1830 that evening, we discovered he had ignored a case that would determine whether an innocent man spent 3 years in military prison. Admiral Sutton's face tightened. "Judge Vasquez, are you saying Captain Morrison simply neglected an emergency appeal?" "I'm saying Captain Morrison demonstrated a pattern of negligence that spans at least 5 years and affects dozens of cases." Elena clicked through a series of slides showing case summaries, missed deadlines, inadequate trial preparation, and mischaracterized legal standards. This is not an isolated incident. This is systematic incompetence, enabled by inadequate supervision and protected by his senior rank. She pulled up the Henderson trial transcript. In this court-martial, Captain Morrison repeatedly cited dissenting opinions as binding precedent. He mischaracterized fundamental elements of Article 107. He failed to conduct adequate pre-trial investigation. His client received 18 months confinement and a bad conduct discharge, a sentence that could have been significantly reduced with competent representation. Morrison sat frozen in his seat, his face ashen. Elena continued methodically through the evidence. The 43 flagged cases. The client complaints that were dismissed. The appeals that were never filed. The exculpatory evidence that was never investigated. Each slide built on the last, creating an irrefutable picture of an attorney who had stopped caring about his clients years ago. "The question before this assembly," Elena said, her tone measured but carrying unmistakable weight, "is not whether Captain Morrison is guilty of professional incompetence. The evidence makes that abundantly clear. The question is, how did this continue for so long without intervention?" Admiral Sutton leaned forward. "Judge Vasquez, are you suggesting failures beyond Captain Morrison's individual conduct?" "I'm documenting them, ma'am." Elena pulled up organizational charts. Captain Morrison handled approximately 30% of all courts-martial in this region. His conviction rate appeared excellent on paper, which satisfied administrative metrics. But no one examined how he achieved those convictions. No one reviewed his trial transcripts for legal accuracy. No one investigated client complaints because they came from junior enlisted personnel with no advocates. She looked directly at Captain Mendoza. "Captain Mendoza, when Captain Torres raised concerns about Morrison's competence 6 months ago, what action did you take?" Mendoza's voice was steady but strained. "I told her she was being overly critical. I did not investigate further." "Why not?" "Because Captain Morrison had a strong reputation. Because his metrics looked good. Because," Mendoza paused, then spoke with painful honesty, "because it was easier to dismiss one captain's concerns than to investigate a senior attorney who had powerful connections." The room was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Elena nodded slowly. "That is exactly the kind of institutional failure that allows incompetence to flourish. Captain Mendoza made a mistake. But he's not alone. How many of us," she looked around the room, "have dismissed concerns because investigating them would be difficult? How many have prioritized metrics over mission? How many have protected senior officers at the expense of junior personnel who had no voice?" Vice Admiral Hartwell spoke from the screen, her voice grave. "Judge Vasquez, what are your recommendations?" Elena pulled up her final slide. "A comprehensive list of systemic reforms. First, immediate competency review of all defense counsel and trial counsel in the region. Not administrative reviews, actual legal competency evaluations conducted by appellate judges. Second, mandatory peer review of all court-martial trial strategies before trial. Third, Establishment of a confidential hotline where clients can report attorney misconduct without fear of retaliation. Fourth, revision of performance metrics to include quality of representation, not just conviction rates or case closure numbers. She paused, letting each recommendation sink in. Fifth, and, most importantly, creation of a regional ombudsman position, an experienced attorney independent of the chain of command who can investigate complaints, review cases, and intervene when incompetence is suspected. Someone with the authority to override rank when protecting clients' rights. That's a significant organizational change, Admiral Sutton observed. It's a necessary organizational change, ma'am. Because what happened here will happen again unless we build structural protections against it. Elena closed her laptop and faced the room directly. I want to be clear about something. Captain Morrison's failures are his own. He will face appropriate accountability. But the system that allowed him to fail so many sailors for so long, that's on all of us. That's on every supervisor who didn't investigate, every peer who noticed problems but stayed silent, every administrator who prioritized efficiency over justice. She looked at Morrison directly for the first time. Captain, do you have anything to say? Morrison stood slowly, his movements those of a much older man. His voice was barely audible. Your Honor, Admirals, fellow officers, I have no defense for my actions. Judge Vasquez's assessment is accurate and fair. I failed my clients. I failed the Navy. I failed the oath I took when I became an attorney. He paused, gathering himself. I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences are deemed appropriate. But I want to say one thing to the sailors I represented poorly. I'm sorry. Those words are inadequate, but they're all I have. He sat down heavily. Admiral Hartwell spoke from the screen. Captain Morrison, you will be detached from all case responsibilities effective immediately. A board of inquiry will convene within 30 days to determine your fitness to continue as a military attorney. Based on Judge Vasquez's findings, I'm recommending revocation of your license to practice military law and administrative separation from the service. Morrison nodded once, accepting the sentence. However, the JAG continued. Judge Vasquez has also reported that you have expressed willingness to cooperate fully with case reviews and to assist in remediation efforts. If you do so genuinely and completely, that cooperation will be noted in your record. I will, ma'am, Morrison said quietly. It's the least I can do. Admiral Hartwell turned her attention to the broader room. Judge Vasquez's recommendations are approved in their entirety. We will begin implementation immediately. Captain Mendoza, you will oversee the transition under Judge Vasquez's supervision. Yes, ma'am, Mendoza said. Commander Park, the JAG continued. You are hereby appointed acting senior defense counsel, effective immediately. Park stood, clearly shocked. Ma'am, I thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet, Commander. You're inheriting a disaster. But Judge Vasquez believes you have the competence and integrity to fix it. Prove her right. I will, ma'am. Admiral Hartwell's expression softened slightly. Judge Vasquez, on behalf of the Judge Advocate General's Corps and the United States Navy, thank you. Your service to military justice over the past 31 years has been exemplary. This assessment, difficult as it was, will protect countless sailors for years to come. Elena inclined her head. Thank you, Admiral. But the real credit belongs to the attorneys like Commander Park, Lieutenant Commander Reeves, and Captain Torres, who maintained their standards despite a toxic command climate. And to staff like Chief Webb, who kept the system functioning when leadership failed. They're the ones who deserve recognition. They'll receive it, Admiral Hartwell promised. But right now, I want every person in that room to understand something. Judge Vasquez didn't have to conduct this assessment the way she did. She could have arrived with full authority visible, conducted formal interviews, and written a sanitized report. Instead, she subjected herself to dismissal, condescension, and disrespect to see the truth of how this office actually operated. The JAG's voice took on steel. She endured being mocked by Captain Morrison, She watched incompetent legal work without intervening, knowing sailors were being harmed, because she needed to document the full scope of the problem. She sacrificed her own comfort and dignity to protect the integrity of military justice. That is what service looks like. That is what honor demands. Admiral Sutton stood. Without a word, she came to attention and rendered a crisp salute toward Elena. The effect rippled through the room like a wave. Admiral Hartwell saluted from the screen. Captain Mendoza rose and saluted. Commander Park and Lieutenant Commander Reeves followed instantly. Then every person in the room from the two-star admiral to the newest ensign stood and saluted in unison. The sound of boots striking the floor, of fabric rustling, of breath held in collective respect, filled the conference room. It was a moment of pure acknowledgement, ranks dissolving into shared understanding that they were witnessing something rare, true courage in service of justice. Elena stood very still, feeling the weight of 31 years of service, of thousands of cases reviewed, of countless hours spent protecting sailors who would never know her name. She returned the salute with steady precision, her eyes moving across the room, connecting with each person. When the salute finally broke, there was a moment of profound silence. Then Captain Torres spoke from near the door, her voice carrying clear emotion. "Your Honor, if I may, you showed us what leadership actually looks like. Not rank, not position, but competence married with integrity. You reminded us why we chose this profession." "Here, here," several voices murmured. Elena's expression remained composed, but those closest to her could see the emotion she was carefully controlling. "Captain Torres, you demonstrated leadership long before I arrived. You raised concerns knowing it could cost you your career. That took more courage than anything I did." She looked around the room one final time. "Every person here has a choice now. You can see this as an embarrassing episode to be forgotten as quickly as possible. Or you can see it as an opportunity, a chance to rebuild military justice in this region into something stronger, better, more responsive to the sailors who depend on us. The second option requires work. It requires admitting failures. It requires changing comfortable patterns. But it's the only option that honors the oath we all took." Commander Park spoke up. "Your Honor, speaking for everyone here, we choose the second option. And we'd be honored if you'd stay to help us implement it." Elena smiled faintly. "Commander, I'll be here for the next 30 days, overseeing the transition. After that, I return to the appellate court. But you won't need me. You have everything required right here: competent attorneys, dedicated staff, and now, a command climate where speaking truth to power is valued rather than punished." She gathered her materials. "The briefing is concluded. Captain Mendoza, I'll need to speak with you about implementation timelines. Commander Park, we should discuss your transition plan. Everyone else return to your duties. We have dozens of cases to review and sailors to contact." The room began to empty slowly, people lingering as if reluctant to leave the moment behind. But Elena had already shifted into operational mode, spreading documents across the conference table and beginning the methodical work of rebuilding what had been broken. Captain Bradley Morrison remained seated long after most others had left. He watched Elena work with Commander Park and Captain Torres, discussing case priorities and review protocols. The efficient competence that characterized every motion felt like an indictment of everything he'd let himself become. Finally, when the room had cleared except for Elena and Chief Webb organizing files, Morrison stood and approached. "Your Honor, may I have a moment?" Elena looked up, her expression neutral but not unkind. "Of course, Captain." Morrison waited until Webb tactfully moved to the far end of the room before speaking. "I need you to understand something. What I said in the briefing about being sorry, about cooperating, that wasn't strategy. That wasn't me trying to salvage my career." His voice cracked slightly. "I've spent the past 12 hours thinking about every case I mishandled, every sailor I failed, faces I'd forgotten, names I never bothered to remember." "Why are you telling me this?" Elena asked quietly. "Because you showed me something yesterday. When you could have destroyed me completely, you gave me a path forward instead. You gave me a chance to do something meaningful with whatever time I have left. He met her eyes. I don't deserve that grace, but I'm going to use it. I'm going to spend every remaining day of my service fixing what I broke. Elena studied him for a long moment. He would Jan. Captain, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. When did you stop caring? Morrison closed his eyes. 7 years ago. I made captain. I'd won a big case that got attention at the flag level. Suddenly, I was the golden boy invitations to the admiral's functions. Softball questions at fitness report time. Everyone assuming I was destined for bigger things. And you started believing your own press. Elena finished. Worse. I started thinking I didn't need to work as hard because my reputation would carry me. I stopped reading new case law. Stopped preparing thoroughly for trial. Started relying on courtroom presence instead of legal substance. He opened his eyes. And every time I got away with it, every time a case closed without anyone noticing my sloppiness, it reinforced the belief that I could coast. Until you couldn't, Elena said. Until a sailor named Marcus Webb wrote a letter that reached someone who actually cared enough to investigate. Morrison's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Your Honor, I need to know how many of my clients ended up in the brig when they shouldn't have. How many lost careers, families, futures because I was too lazy to do my job. We're still counting, Elena said honestly. But based on preliminary review, we've identified at least 17 cases where inadequate defense likely affected the outcome. Some will be overturned on appeal. Some sentences will be reduced. Some, she paused, choosing words carefully. Some damage can't be undone. A sailor who served 6 months in the brig and received a bad conduct discharge, we can overturn the conviction, but we can't give him back that time. Morrison's face crumpled. Oh God. But you can help minimize future damage, Elena said firmly. You can review every case honestly, identifying where you failed and what placer should have been done differently. You can testify at appeal hearings, putting aside ego to admit your mistakes. You can train junior attorneys by being the cautionary tale they need to see. I'll do all of it, Morrison said. Whatever you need. Elena pulled out a thick folder. Start with these. 15 cases where you missed obvious defenses, or failed to investigate exculpatory evidence. I need you to write a detailed memo on each one, what you did wrong, what you should have done, what the correct legal standard was. Be brutally honest. These memos will be used in the appeals process. Morrison took the folder with trembling hands. How long do I have? 2 weeks. Can you manage that? I'll work around the clock if necessary. Elena's expression softened slightly. Captain, here's what I want you to remember. You made terrible mistakes. You violated your oath. You harmed people who trusted you. Those facts can't be changed. But what happens next, whether you use this experience to help others, or simply wallow in self-pity that's still within your control? Choose the former. Choose to be useful in your final months of service. It won't erase what you did, but it might balance the scales slightly. Morrison straightened, some of the military bearing returning. Your Honor, I give you my word I will cooperate fully, honestly, and completely. No excuses, no self-preservation. Just the truth. That's all I ask. Morrison came to attention and saluted with more precision than he'd shown in years. Elena returned it, and for a moment, they stood in mutual acknowledgement not of forgiveness, but of accountability accepted and responsibility embraced. When Morrison lowered his hand, he spoke one more time. Your Honor, can I ask why did you become a military attorney? Elena was quiet for a moment, looking past him at something distant. I had a brother, she said finally. Marine Corporal. Deployed to Beirut in 1983. He was killed in the barracks. Bombing. He was 20 years old. Morrison's breath caught. After he died, I learned that there had been intelligence warnings about the security situation. Recommendations that were ignored. Officers who failed to protect their Marines because following proper protocols was inconvenient. She looked at Morrison directly. I became a military attorney because I never wanted another family to lose someone due to an officer's negligence or incompetence. Your Honor, you didn't kill anyone, Captain, but you harmed sailors through the same mechanism, choosing comfort over competence, ego over duty. That's why this matters so much. That's why we have to do better. Morrison nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Elena gestured to the folder. Get started on those memos. If you have questions, Commander Park will be your point of contact. I'll review your work personally before it's filed with the appeals court. Yes, ma'am. Morrison turned to leave, then paused. At the door. Your Honor, thank you. For seeing me as more than just my worst actions. Everyone deserves that courtesy, Captain. Including the sailors you represented poorly. Remember that, when you're writing those memos. Morrison left, carrying the folder like it weighed 50 pounds. Chief Webb approached from the corner where he'd been working. Your Honor, that was more grace than he deserved. Perhaps, Elena agreed. But grace isn't about deserving, Chief. It's about recognizing that broken people can sometimes do the most good when they're given a chance to repair the damage they caused. Webb smiled slightly. My nephew called me last night. He heard about what you did about the whole investigation. He wanted me to thank you. How is Marcus doing? Better. The overturned conviction means he can re-enlist if he wants. He's thinking about it. Webb's voice grew thick with emotion. Your Honor, you gave my nephew his future back. You gave dozens of sailors their futures. Back? I don't have words for what that means. Elena touched his arm gently. You honored your nephew by refusing to give up on him. By writing letters, and raising concerns even when no one listened. That persistence is what made this investigation possible. Be proud of that, Chief. I am, ma'am. And I'm grateful to have served alongside you, even for just a week. The honor was mine, Chief Webb. 30 days passed in a blur of activity. Elena established her temporary office in what had been Morrison's space. A symbolic choice that wasn't lost on anyone. The nameplate on the door now read, Judge Elena Vasquez. Regional Oversight. The transformation of the JAG office was remarkable. Commander Park stepped into the Senior Defense Counsel role with quiet confidence, implementing peer review protocols and establishing regular training sessions. Lieutenant Commander Reeves took over as his deputy, creating a mentorship program that paired experienced attorneys with junior JAGs. Captain Torres received orders to the Office of the Judge Advocate General in Washington, a promotion and recognition of her courage in challenging Morrison, despite the personal risk. Before she left, she stopped by Elena's office. Your Honor, I wanted to thank you. Not just for vindicating my concerns about Morrison, but for showing me that speaking truth to power doesn't have to be career suicide. Elena smiled. You did that yourself, Captain. I just ensured your courage was properly recognized. Still, I'll carry the lesson forward. And I'll make sure the next generation of JAG officers understands that integrity matters more than politics. They shook hands. And Torres left with orders that would put her on track for Admiral herself within a decade. The case reviews yielded sobering results. Of the 43 flagged cases, 21 were determined to have involved inadequate defense representation. 17 convictions were overturned or sentences significantly reduced. 4 sailors were awarded compensation for wrongful confinement. 3 cases revealed prosecutorial misconduct that resulted in administrative action against trial counsel. Captain Morrison kept his word. His memos were brutally honest, documenting failures with painful precision. He testified at 5 appeal hearings, admitting his incompetence on the record and supporting relief for his former clients. The Board of Inquiry, moved by his cooperation, recommended separation from service, but allowed him to retire rather than face dismissal. A small mercy that acknowledged his effort to make amends. Elena attended Morrison's retirement ceremony at his request. It was a small affair. No speeches, no formal honors, just a quiet transfer of his commission, and a final salute. As he prepared to leave the building for the last time, he approached Elena one final time. Your Honor, I've accepted a position with a legal aid clinic. Pro bono work for veterans navigating VA benefits claims. It's not military law, but it's service. Elena finished. It's using your legal knowledge to help those who need advocates. That's honorable work, Captain. Former Captain. Morrison corrected with a sad smile. As of 10 minutes ago, I'm just Mr. Morrison. Then, as Mr. Morrison, I wish you well. Do good work. Help people. Make the second half of your career mean something. I will, Your Honor. I promise. They shook hands, and Morrison walked out of the JAG building for the last time. Elena watched him go, hoping the man who left was genuinely different from the one who'd arrived 7 weeks ago, full of arrogance and false confidence. On Elena's final day in San Diego, the JAG office threw a small gathering. Nothing formal, just coffee and pastries in the conference room. A chance for people to say goodbye to the judge who'd changed everything. Commander Park presented her with a plaque. In recognition of service above self, Judge Elena Vasquez, Guardian of Military Justice. Your Honor, Park said, addressing the assembled group. You taught us that rank is no substitute for competence. That courage sometimes means enduring disrespect to document the truth, and that the system only works when we prioritize the mission over our own comfort. This office is better because you were here. Applause filled the room. Elena accepted the plaque with genuine emotion. Thank you all. But I want to be clear about something. The transformation you've seen in this office isn't because of me. It's because of you. Commander Park and Lieutenant Commander Reeves, who maintained standards. Captain Torres, who refused to stay silent. Chief Webb and the enlisted staff, who kept operations running despite leadership failures. You were doing the right thing long before I arrived. I just made sure people noticed. She looked around the room, making eye contact with familiar faces. Military justice only works when we remember we serve something bigger than ourselves. We serve sailors and Marines who trust us to protect their rights. We serve the Constitution and the rule of law. We serve the families who send their loved ones into harm's way believing the system will treat them fairly. Never forget that. Never let metrics or politics or career advancement distract you from that core mission. And never be afraid to speak up when you see injustice. Even if challenging it feels dangerous. Her voice softened. Because somewhere out there, there's a young sailor facing charges who will need your competence and courage. There's a family trusting that the attorney representing their child will fight as hard as the situation demands. There's a commanding officer depending on military justice to be fair and impartial. Don't fail them. Don't be the next Captain Morrison. Be the attorneys I've seen this past month, dedicated, competent, willing to do the hard work that real justice requires. The room was silent, except for the sound of someone quietly crying. Elena set down the plaque and smiled. Now, I believe someone mentioned pastries. Let's not let good food go to waste. The tension broke with laughter, and the gathering shifted into a more relaxed farewell. Elena moved through the room, sharing personal words with individuals, thanking them for their service, offering guidance for challenges ahead. As the afternoon waned, she found herself alone in her temporary office one last time. The space was empty now, files packed, computer cleared, personal items boxed. Only the view remained. Looking out over the base, where thousands of sailors trained, worked, and trusted that the system would protect them. Chief Webb knocked softly on the door frame. Your Honor, your car is here. Flight leaves in 2 hours. Thank you, Chief. Elena picked up her briefcase, the same worn leather one she'd carried in that first morning, when everyone assumed she was just another forgettable consultant. Ma'am, can I ask, will you ever do something like this again? Another undercover assessment? Elena smiled. The Judge Advocate General has already asked me that question. My answer was, if the mission requires it, yes. But I hope it won't be necessary. I hope the reforms we've implemented here will prevent the kind of systemic failure that necessitated this investigation. And if they don't, then I'll come back. However many times it takes. Because this, she gestured to encompass the building, the base, the entire military justice system, is too important to let it fail. Webb came to attention one final time and rendered his sharpest salute. Your Honor, it has been the greatest privilege of my career to serve alongside you. Elena returned the salute, holding it for a long moment. The privilege was mine, Chief. Take care of this office. Take care of each other. And take care of the sailors who need you. She walked out of the building, into the golden afternoon light. In the parking lot, a small group had assembled, despite her request for no formal farewell. Park, Reeves, Mendoza, and a dozen others who'd been touched by her presence. They stood at attention as she approached, and without a word, they saluted in unison. Elena stopped, setting down her briefcase. She came to attention and returned the salute with all the dignity and precision of 31 years of service. The moment stretched, suspended in the warm California air, a final acknowledgement between warriors who'd fought the same battle from different positions. When she finally lowered her hand, Elena picked up her briefcase and walked to the waiting car. She didn't look back. There was no need. The work was done. The office was in capable hands. And somewhere in the Pacific, a sailor named Marcus Webb was getting ready to re-enlist, his future restored by a system that had finally lived up to its promise. That was enough. The sedan pulled away from Naval Station San Diego just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the back seat, Elena opened her phone and found a message from Vice Admiral Hartwell. Judge Vasquez, initial results from regional assessments based on your model are complete. 2 more offices showing serious deficiencies. Can you deploy for follow-up investigations? VADM Hartwell. Elena looked out the window at the base, disappearing behind her, at the sailors changing watch, at the flags snapping in the evening breeze. She thought about Morrison's victims getting their lives back. She thought about Park and Reeves building something better. She thought about her brother, gone 40 years now, and the promise she'd made to ensure his sacrifice and all sacrifices were honored by a system that actually worked. She typed her reply. Yes, ma'am. Send me the details. I'll be ready. Because that's what service meant. Not the glory or recognition or thanks. Just the quiet determination to show up, do the work, and ensure that justice, real justice, not the comfortable fiction of it, actually prevailed. The car merged onto the highway, carrying her toward the airport and the next mission. Behind her, the sun set over Naval Station San Diego, where a reformed JAG office was beginning the hard work of living up to its oath. And in offices across the Navy, attorneys who'd heard about the undercover judge began looking at their own cases with fresh eyes, wondering if they were living up to the standards she'd demanded. The ripples would spread for years. Cases would be reviewed. Standards would be raised. Sailors would be protected. All because one judge had been willing to endure mockery and dismissal to document the truth. All because competence and courage had, for once, prevailed over rank and politics. All because the system, when properly guarded, could still deliver on its promise. Justice. Real, hard-won, imperfect, but genuine justice. That was the legacy. That was the mission. That was enough. The story of Judge Elena Vasquez reminds us of something fundamental about leadership and integrity. True authority doesn't come from rank or position. It comes from competence married with character. It comes from the willingness to endure disrespect to document truth. It comes from choosing mission over ego, every single time. Captain Morrison's fall wasn't about one man's failure. It was about a system that had stopped questioning its own assumptions, that had prioritized metrics over mission, that had protected senior officers at the expense of junior personnel who had no voice. But it's also about redemption, not easy redemption, not cheap grace, but the hard work of making amends when you've caused harm. Morrison will spend years living with what he did, but he'll also spend those years trying to help others avoid his mistakes. That matters. And it's about the heroes who never sought recognition. Chief Webb, who refused to give up on his nephew. Captain Torres, who spoke up despite the risk. Commander Park and Lieutenant Commander Reeves, who maintained their standards even when leadership failed. The junior enlisted personnel, who kept the system functioning despite everything. Military justice only works when we remember it's not about us, the attorneys, the judges, the officers who administer it. It's about the sailors and Marines who trust us to protect their rights, their futures, their families. When we forget that, we become Captain Morrison. When we remember it, we become Judge Vasquez. The choice is ours. Every day. Every case. Every time we're faced with doing the right thing or the comfortable thing. Judge Vasquez chose the right thing. She chose it when it meant enduring mockery. She chose it when it meant working through the night. She chose it when it would have been easier to write a sanitized report and move on. She chose honor over convenience. She chose mission over comfort. She chose to be the guardian military justice needed, even when no one knew she was there. That's what real leadership looks like. That's what service demands. That's what honor requires. So the next time you see someone dismissed because they don't have rank or credentials visible, remember Judge Vasquez, sitting quietly in the back of that courtroom, documenting every failure, preparing to ensure justice finally prevailed. The next time you're tempted to coast on reputation rather than doing the hard work, remember Captain Morrison and the dozens of sailors whose lives he derailed through his negligence. And the next time you wonder if speaking up against authority is worth the risk, remember Captain Torres, whose courage helped change an entire system. Honor isn't proven when everyone is watching. It's proven in the quiet moments. When you think no one important is paying attention, those are the moments that define us. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where you are watching from and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.